We're going to look at the development of the federal courts. There are three eras that we're going to look at. The first one is obviously from the beginning of our government up until the Civil War. So the dominant issue of the Supreme Court very early on is this relationship between the national government and the state. So this question was definitely left unresolved, and that's the first conflict we see between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And actually, even though it was the dominant issue back then, it's still an issue today. Who has the power? This idea of federalism, national, state, where does the power lie? Chief Justice John Marshall definitely was a Federalist. He felt the national law was dominant in all instances. He had the Supremacy Clause in Article 6 to back up his argument. We have Marbury versus Madison, which establishes judicial review. We have McCulloch versus Maryland, that gives Congress increased powers, plus the national supremacy over the fact that the states cannot tax the bank. We have the Supreme Court giving itself the power to review state court decisions. And then we have also studied Gibbons versus Ogden, where interstate commerce is going to be regulated by the federal government. The other side to this is Thomas Jefferson. Definitely was an advocate for states' rights. Andrew Jackson comes along, who is another advocate for states' rights. He actually attacks the court for allowing the national bank to exist, and then siding with the Cherokee Indians in disputes with Georgia. And so basically the quote from Andrew Jackson is, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Once again, we don't have the power of the sword and we don't have the power of the purse. So you can try and say and rule anything you want to, but it doesn't matter if I'm not going to enforce it. Next, we have this idea of states wanting to have slavery versus the national government saying we're not going to have it. Chief Justice Roger Taney is the replacement for John Marshall. He is replaced by Thomas Jefferson, so obviously he's going to have or be an advocate for states' rights as opposed to the national government. So we have the Dred Scott versus Sanford case, which definitely leads to the Civil War, and we'll talk specifically about the Dred Scott case in class. But the Civil War outcome, though, reinforces the supremacy of the federal government. So you can have all of these people pushing for states' rights, but at the end, the national government, the Union wins the war, and so we have this reinforcement of national supremacy.